It's month 8. Are you ready to put it all together? I'm very excited. All right, so we have a lot of cutting to do. So take your time, cut all of your pieces for your borders and your binding, and we will get started with step number 1. So since step 1 is simply just telling you to reference the image, I went ahead and jumped into step number 2 and laid out the blocks just like the diagram showed. And these are all going to get sewn together in 2 strips, and then I'm going to sew that to the left and right side of the centerpiece. Here I've got my columns sewn together. So my next step then is to attach those to the centerpiece. Here I've got the column sewn to the left side of my centerpiece. And here is the column sewn to the right side of my centerpiece. And I did match up the centers of my column with the centerpiece, the center square on each side. That step is done. Okay, so the blocks for step 6 are bigger than my table, so I'm just going to kind of give you an overview here of them. There's the bottom, here's the top blocks. You're going to stitch these together and then to the top and bottom of the centerpiece. Now note these blocks here, you're going to want to line those up so that they seem to flow seamlessly. And then when you get to here, you're going to want to make sure that this lines up correctly as well as these. All the way down, up and down. All right, so I've got these large borders on with all those blocks all around the outside. We're moving on to the next step. So step 4 has us attaching these borders to all the sides. The shorter to 2 sides and then the longer to what would then be the top and the bottom. Make sure that you have cut all of your border pieces to the lengths that were given. You don't want to simply stitch down the fabric and then trim it off at the end, because that usually puts in extra fabric that you don't realize until you go to try and quilt it, and then you've got extra pieces in there that just make it go really wonky. So cut your pieces to the length that they said, find your centers, match your centers to your sides, and then match up the rest of the pieces, and we're going to sew those down. So here you can see I have step 4 completed. I've got my fabric on all sides. The piece has gotten too big. I can't show you the whole thing at this point any longer, so I'm just going to show you the corners. And now we're going to go on to step number 5, and we're going to do fabric D to the sides and top and bottom next, just in the same way. All right, so I have step number 5 done. I've got the borders on here. That's fabric D. The next step is a little bit different. We're going to take fabric L and we're going to stitch it to just the top and the bottom, not the sides, just the top and bottom. So I stitched fabric L to the top and the bottom, so that completes step number 6. Then we're going to take all of the fabrics from step 7, all these, and you're going to line them up as the directions show, going from dark to light to dark in both rows, and then we're going to stitch those rows to the top and the bottom again of the quilt. I've got all of my blocks for step 7 stitched together and then stitched to the top and bottom of each end. You'll make sure that when you put these on here that you got your plaid next to the plaid. You didn't turn them around and get the stripe next to the plaid. You want the plaid next to plaid. Because then for step number 8, you're going to take your J fabric and you're going to put it on the sides and the top for that border. Okay, we've got step 8 done, so moving on to step number 9, we're going to put on our last small border onto the sides and top, and that is fabric S, and that's going to go on just like that. We are almost there. So here we are at step number 10. We are in the home stretch. Some of those blocks made me think we were never going to get here. So what we're going to be doing is mitering the corners of this quilt top. If you've never mitered before or it makes you nervous, don't worry. We're going to walk you through it step by step, but it is important that you do follow the instructions correctly. So first thing I want to do is I want to show you my 1/4 inch foot. So it's probably kind of hard to see here, but on here there is this little mark right here. That is a 1/4 inch away from where my needle lands. That's going to be very important when I get down to stitching these on. Maybe you have one that doesn't have that, maybe you do, maybe you weren't aware of it. Take a look at your foot, see if it's there. It's extremely helpful, and I will be perfectly honest with you, I have been sewing with this foot for more than a dozen years before I realized that mark was there. So yeah, kind of embarrassing, but we got through it. So anyway, the first thing you're going to want to do is find the centers of your sides and the center of the border piece that you're going to put on your side, and you're going to line those up like we have in the past, and you're going to pin those on. Now when you go to pin it on, there's going to be extra fabric, okay? Extra going off the end. That's correct. Do not cut that off. When you go to sew this on to your fabric, your edges will be lined up here, but I want you to start sewing 1/4 inch from the end, and I want you to finish sewing 1/4 inch from the other end. So 1/4 inch on each end is going to be left unsewn, and when you do this start and stop, do take a couple of back stitches to secure that in place, because you don't want that coming loose when we go to do the actual mitering. So start here or on your other end, whichever way you start from, stitch up a couple, back stitch a couple, and then continue on down to the other end and do the same. Stop 1/4 inch away, back stitch, come forward back up to that 1/4 inch again, stop, cut your threads, and go on to the next side. You're going to do that for all 4 sides. That same process. Do your sides first, and then do your top. When you've got each of these sides stitched on, you go to press it towards the border piece. Now that I've got my borders sewn on, and I stopped 1/4 inch away from the corner on each side, these have been pressed. Now we're going to fold the quilt along this line. Okay, we're going to use this point, which is right here, and we're going to fold the quilt up that way, and we're going to line up the border pieces like that, so that they lie flat, their edges match. Sometimes you just gotta play with it a little bit. Okay. So that's folded. The edges of the borders match. I'm on my point here. So now we're going to take our ruler and we're going to use the 45-degree angle line, which is here. And I'm going to lay it across this line, and I'm going to line it up with my folded quilt top. So here's my 45-degree line. It is lined up with the top of the border. It is lined up with my quilt. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line along it. So I'll take my pencil and I've drawn my line, and that is going to be my stitching line. So I'm going to take that off and I'm going to pin that so it stays together. I'm still lined up. Yep, still lined up. Oops. Pin it. And now I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and I am going to stitch on this line. I've gotten this line stitched, and the next step is to trim off this seam allowance. So we've got our 1/4 inch seam allowance and the rest of this comes off. If you're nervous about doing that, which is understandable, you can open it up to see how it looks first. So there is my mitered corner. I've got just a slight pucker in this corner, so I will probably take out 1 or 2 stitches from my seam so that lays flat. But that's the only adjustment I'm going to do, and I can go ahead and trim this off to my 1/4 inch. There we go. So when you come into the store and you see it finished, I will have taken out that extra stitch or 2, and all my corners are going to be mitered in the same way. You got this. Here we go. Here is the finished top. We've got it all done. Just needs to be quilted. I hope everybody had a good time. Now I'm off to change the needle in my sewing machine and the blade in my rotary cutter and start the next project. See you then.